All right, so as promised, what, 3 months ago? Or January, I think it was.
Yeah.
Right, so 3.5 months ago, I'm finally on Lloyd's sofa. Lloyd, thank you for having me here. It was, that was my biggest smile when I got into the house. I'm like, there's a sofa there, that's exactly where we're gonna film. Last time we chatted via Interlink, it was, we chatted about apartheid. Now let's go to a topic that has become mainstream, although you in particular have been researching it for like 6, 7 years at the very least, which is Qatari in particular and Islamic general funding towards American universities.
Yeah.
Why don't you introduce my audience to the background of this?
There's so much to add, but to try to simplify, there are multiple kinds of jihad. There's about 13 or 14 kinds that scholars recognize. In the Sharia, there's officially only one kind of jihad defined in the Sharia, which is violent jihad. However, when you look at Islam, they have these 5 pillars, and one of those is zakat. They pay charity, as they often call it. 1/8 of that charity must go towards supporting the jihad. And all Muslims must do jihad. So they can do jihad in terms of funding, they can do propaganda, etc., etc. Whatever they feel is helpful. So, and of course, with the Muslim Brotherhood being a very sophisticated organization, they have infiltrated government, judiciary, and of course, we see that in the universities, these hate marches since October 7th, where they've hundreds of cities around the world, they've been having these marches, universities, disrupting life. So they've infected the minds of the youth. These minds have now obviously been indoctrinated to believe in the Palestinian cause and to hate Israel. Wherever you see Qatari money has gone, you see that these anti-Semitism has become a problem. These hate marches become a problem. So they are doing jihad, and they believe they're being righteous by spreading Islam. And it is, of course, obligatory that Islam has to take over the world. They have to develop the caliphate. So this is all part and parcel of the same problem. And jihad of the wallet is just one way that Qatar and Saudi can fulfill this purpose. But of course, while they all cooperate, they also compete. So, and then of course,
whose brand of Islam will dominate the future Islamic world, right?
There is that. And look, Saudi's a frenemy. You look at Turkey. Turkey's a member of NATO, but yet Turkey has just invaded Syria. They've occupied huge amounts of the country. They're still occupying, Cyprus?
The northern part, yeah.
Since
TRNC.
Since the 60s, I believe.
70s, but yes.
And they're guilty of genocide. Look at the Armenian genocide. They refuse to acknowledge that. So these are people that want to go back to, at least the current government wants to go back to 1924, before the caliphate was abolished. He wants to, he established the old name of Turkey, Turkiye. Why would you want to, he has his reasons for doing that. So,
to be fair, it was always called Turkey. It's just that the English found it too difficult to pronounce it, and therefore in English it stayed Turkey.
Okay.
It had always been called Turkey. Because the beef these days seems to be only with the English language, because in other languages it was called something closer to Turkey anyway, even before the republic existed. Like for instance in Romania, if you look at in the 19th century, when the current republic obviously didn't exist, it was called the Ottoman Empire. In Romanian papers it was called Turcia. And we still don't have a problem with them, because we still call them Turcia, and it's the legal name.
Okay. Well, then he's obviously trying to impose the same definition on the West.
Yes. And now, to be fair, the Erdogan administration is really interesting, because we often characterize it in our podcast as neo-Ottomanist, because it kind of is. In some cases, very conservative Ottomanist, but in other cases, not really. It deviates quite a bit. It's more close to the former movement called Milli Görüş, which started as from Fethullah Gülen, but then got splintered, because nowadays, of course, Fethullah Gülen and all of the Gülenist movement is associated with the reform movement in Turkey, rather than the conservative one. They got split over a bit in the 80s due to the way they dealt with the Kurds. One is a bit more nationalistic, one is a bit more internationalistic. So.
Right. On that point, I spent time in northern Iraq on a few occasions working up there with the Kurds, close to the ISIS front lines back then during that war. And it's interesting, the Kurds may be victims of the Iraqis as well as the Turks. That is true. However, obviously for the Iraqis it's a problem. They would lose territory if they gave Kurdistan its freedom. They would lose territory and resources, including oil reserves. That said, one of the first things I got told when I got off the plane was, don't look at the local women. The Kurds will beat you up. Now, just as an idea, the Kurds may be victims of one group, but they themselves are violent.
Yeah, and the victimizers of smaller groups
Other
around
groups.
them, yes.
Correct. So the idea that, that the group is automatically righteous because they're a victim, this is not true. The entire region this mindset is part and parcel of the whole region.
That's really interesting, because in the West, we've had it imposed upon us, and I'm not sure that's the correct language to use, but for the purposes of this talk, that we have this very simplified view of things, right? The Kurds are the victims, the Philistines are the victims, and therefore there's ipso facto righteous just because. Now let's forget about the crimes committed by the Philistines or the Kurds or the Tutsis or the Hutsis, and on like that it goes, right? And it's been about 40 or 50 years now, and almost all of that is Soviet origin. We've covered some of that in our talk about apartheid. A lot of it is Russian influence. So these days, Russia has a slightly smaller influence on these things because it lost a lot of financial resources being busy with the war next door, like literally next door, is very close from where we're filming. Yeah. But now it got taken over by Qatar and Saudi. But particularly Qatar these days has a huge magnifying glass above it. And now more and more people who called us crazy 7 or 8 years ago are now talking about, hold on a second, maybe there is an issue there. My question was more like, how did that happen, not why?
Oh, how? Saudi is fragmented. Saudi's got tens of thousands of princes, and it's very hard to find. Now you've got one leader. They're also becoming, shall we say, at least at this point, somewhat more, let's say, moderate. They are suppressing Islam, and they're taking a more Western slant. Now, this, of course, could change tomorrow. If the current Saudi prince dies, and let's say his stepbrother takes over, for argument's sake, who happens to be a fundamentalist, as to use those terms, then we're back to square one, right? Whereas Qatar is much smaller, tiny population, floating on oil and gas. It has a lot of money, and
a centralized leadership.
It doesn't have the fragmentation. It doesn't have the infighting. It doesn't have the squabbling. It is able to use this finance. Also, it doesn't draw the attention that Saudi does or Iran does. And it actually collaborates with Iran. So it doesn't draw the attention. It's able to operate a lot more secretly. It's clearly aligned with Hamas. So, and the Muslim Brotherhood, it hosts them there. They live there. It has been cooperating with Iran, and it's using its billions, because if you look at the per capita, it's one of the richest countries on earth. So it's able to use this money. It has infiltrated universities, first elite universities in the West, and then, of course, in Europe. It is influencing politics. It is influencing culture. It is influencing education. It is everywhere. It's not just confined to universities. They are influencing school at all levels. You look at, and also then they're sending imams to various places. So they'll be sending imams, they'll be printing school textbooks, they'll be influencing what gets preached in mosques and so on.
Yeah, in Sweden, a lot of the problems with the Muslim community, as the Social Democrats would call them, ended almost overnight, as soon as they authorized the demolition of a Qatari-funded mosque and the deportation of several key figures. Just like that, like about 2/3 of the violence in the area just disappeared, just like that. It's quite amazing what the disproportionate influence Qatar can exercise in certain areas of the West in general.
It's crazy, but if you think, people use this false made-up term to whitewash Islam called Islamism, which clearly leaves one with the impression that it's got nothing to do with Islam.
Now, of course it does.
It's Islam. I mean, it's, Islamism is merely jihad, which is an obligatory part of Islam. Now, the more Muslims you have, the more jihad you're going to have. It's simple mathematics. if you have a toxin in a food, the more of that food you eat, the more the toxin you'll absorb. It's really simple. And if you also, what's crazy, look at the UK as a parallel, something like 60 or 70% of those mosques are Deobandi mosques. Deobandi is the same, shall we say, flavor of Islam that the Taliban follow. Now, why would you have 70% of your mosques Taliban mosques? Like, what is about Afghanis and Taliban that you want to import into your country that you're desperately missing?
Well, but Taliban just means students. They're importing education.
Students of the Sharia.
Yeah, well, they always leave that part out, but yes.
Yeah, it's crazy. Rashida Tlaib, she's a student.
Yes, yes, she is. So is Ilhan Omar.
Yes.
She just visited my country a few weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yes. All of the press was very careful. I mean, of course, they did say that she was among the American delegation, but they were very careful to avoid pictures with her and draw attention to her because that would have... and lucky for us, the actual pro-Russians didn't notice that either, so they didn't exploit it to create anti-American propaganda. Because that's one a big problem with not just the left, but pro-Islam left as well. They are losing our geopolitics because it becomes left-coded and associated with the West collectively being pro-Islam, which here in Eastern Europe is absolutely haram, to stay with the lingo, and can definitely, again, help Russian geopolitics. So, yeah.
Yeah, you asked how Qatar is infiltrating so successfully money. Very simply, buying. I've done on my channel a discussion called the Arab lobby. Now, everyone panics about the supposed Israeli lobby, but if you follow the simple principle of following the money, and for instance, I have a number of figures that I showed you some of the slides earlier. I mean, you take, let's say, I believe it's of Georgetown, I could be wrong, but the numbers and the talks are on my channel. Israel typically invests in universities in technology, but typically in biotechnology, farming. That's where they're spending their money. So, for instance, in Georgetown, Israel funded, I think it came to $500,000, which they funded to the biotechnology center, which is for better farming.
500K is nothing.
Whereas the Qataris, in that same period, invested, and I think for that university was over $110 million. I mean, that's nearly 200 times the investment. Now, everyone talks about, oh, look at the power of the Israeli lobby. One, people like Israel. The fact is,
quite a lot of Americans do. Yes.
Like Israel.
Yeah.
It's the Holy Land. It's the birthplace of Jesus, and so on and so on. People like the Israelis. And two, they talk about AIPAC. AIPAC is publicly funded. It's people volunteering their own money. This is not funding coming from a government, whereas you look at the money coming out of Qatar, this is government-funded infiltration, government-funded manipulation, government-funded PR. And you look at one of the princes of Saudi. He had a private 747, and he has permission to land at military air bases in the UK, for instance. Bandar Bush.
Yeah.
I don't have permission to land at private military air bases in the UK, but he does. You look at a certain gay Muslim financier who's buying clothes for a certain UK Prime Minister and his wife. Does raise a few eyebrows, but when you start to look at how close the Bush family was with the Saudis, Bandar Bush, when you look at the media doesn't focus on it, but you look at just these tight connections, the influence, how much money they've spent in technology companies, in buying up Silicon Valley, in buying up property, buying influence in newspapers, media, advertising, and such. It is just shocking how much money they have. And collectively, there's 50 plus Islamic countries that operate together as a bloc at the UN. They vote as a bloc, they work as a unit, and they may have internal squabbles, but they also have the same goals. And you look at Israel as a country doesn't have oil. So financially, you've got this huge giant, you've got tens of billions of dollars in the Islamic countries, and we're supposed to go, well, Israel's bad, let's ignore everything coming from Islam. It makes no sense. It's just apologetics and ignorance, willful blindness on a massive scale.
Yeah, my question is significantly focused on how, because after October 7th, there was an attempt to replicate what was done in Western universities. There was an attempt to replicate it in Romania. It worked exactly once after the first pro-Philistine protest. Half of them ended up deported.
Great.
And the other half, since they were citizens, could not be deported, but they were politely asked to mind their own goddamn business rather than attend pro-Hamas protests. It's not illegal to attend pro-Hamas protests, but it's just in poor taste, right? And the first question was like, well, why do we have so many citizens who are not Muslims? Some of them have never been to Israel or to Gaza or whatever, but they're so goddamn interested into something that is none of their business, more or less, quite literally. And half of it ended up leading to Qatari-funded propaganda. And half of it led to, untreated mental illness. Now, okay, we can solve the mental illness part by just investing a bit more in psychiatric facilities. But we're still left with the Qatari propaganda, which runs, as opposed to Russian propaganda or even Chinese propaganda, which at the very least we have people that charter it. Heck, I myself have been chartering Chinese propaganda lately. But nobody charters Qatari propaganda yet. And one of the reasons I'm going to Central Asia again in a few months is because in Tajikistan, the only news source that is not in Russian, and it's especially in English, is only Al Jazeera, again, owned by Qatar.
Oh, wow.
Same thing in Turkmenistan. If you want to read something from Turkmenistan and you don't speak Russian or Turkmen, only Al Jazeera. It's really interesting that in so many of these resource-rich countries, Turkmenistan and Tajikistan being among the most resource-rich that are not in the Middle East, are the propaganda can only come by filtered through Qatar. And it's particularly interesting because also these two countries are, how should I say it, population sources, with a population that is quite extremist. That is to say, you only have violent Muslims and non-Muslims. Almost nothing in between, right? Tajikistan is a source of Islamic terrorism much higher than its per capita population. But by the same token, a significant majority of the population is simply not interested. And to the point of, so what creates these kinds of dynamics? And maybe the Qatari propaganda is not particularly that important there. I'll see, that's why I'm going, because it's impossible to find out without going there. And the reason being that almost everything is a chokehold funded by Qatar, either directly via Al Jazeera or indirectly, if you look at their funding through various educational institutions. There's some European NGO for peace and whatever. Okay, and who's funding that? And if you a few clicks later, opa, again, Qatar. And this creates a dilemma because how do you charter these kinds of things? And you also end up with people who genuinely end up believing it without knowing that they're regurgitating more or less Islamic propaganda, government-funded Islamic propaganda.
That is scary.
It is.
That's actually very scary. But then again, follow the money. Look what President Trump did with US aid. I mean, they were funding woke and, shall we say, transgenderism, gender confusion worldwide.
Yes.
It was a government program, aided and abetted by your Democrat government through all sorts of sources. So cut the funding and it should shrivel up and die. Now, of course, he's being undermined by lawfare. You've now got weaponized court system. Now, but I think when they've infected the education system and they've infected the media with their propaganda,
it becomes self-sustainable somehow, even if you cut the funding.
I mean, they've weaponized, you're getting one perspective, you're getting one side of the argument, you're getting you're getting indoctrination, not news. And you're not getting the full scope of the problem. You're not getting the other side. And in Islam, they're not going to give Islam a bad name. Qatari news is not going to paint Islam in a negative light.
It's very, you can count, you can sometimes find negative news about Islam on Al Jazeera, but it's so rare that you take a screenshot and it's like, how did this cross the editorial board? It's very rare. But the thing is, I don't expect Al Jazeera to broadcast negative news about Islam. But I do expect Fox News to do it. I do expect France 24 to do it. And they don't. Or they do, but nowhere near enough, for sure. And it's still down to extremists like us.
Well, look, it's coming. I've noticed through interactions on my channel, in the UK, something is changing. There's a new dynamic. Now, I firmly believe the government is aware of what is going on, and they're trying to suppress the local population, the native population, because they're afraid of civil unrest, potentially even civil war. And Dr. David Betts, who's a well-known consultant to Western governments on the issue of civil war, has stated that he sees civil war happening in the UK in the next 5 years. Right. So he says all the ingredients are there for explosive civil war. Now, you've got, just distracted by the. But the UK, I am seeing that people are tired. You can only lie to them for so long. And I'm seeing agitation. People are very unhappy. And what you've got is, I'm seeing a unification of certain thoughts across the UK population, at least in the media. And you see the UK government right now, the police are training to suppress riots by locals. They did nothing to suppress riots by foreigners or by Muslims.
Especially not by Muslims.
Especially not by Muslims. They're afraid of actually causing civil unrest. However, you've got a minority population that, while they may be violent and while they will cause damage, certainly they could not sustain it the way that the majority population of the country could.
Yeah.
And if that happens in the country, you suddenly got a serious problem. And another little factor, just to add in, if you look at the population of Pakistani Muslims in all of the Western countries, you make a list, the size of the army in that country and the number of Pakistani Muslim males. In every instance, the number of Pakistani Muslim males in those countries is larger than the army, which, just food for thought.
Right. But that happened after the propaganda. What I'm asking is, because we still have time, we'll continue to have time, to be fair. Our deportations work pretty decently here in Eastern Europe. But nevertheless, we're looking at how to avoid, because quite frankly, I don't give a damn about the United Kingdom. Whatever happens to the United Kingdom is utterly irrelevant to myself. What I care is our region here. Because our region here still has the fundamentals somewhat right. Right, which is the best I can say. I mean,
cut the immigration, cut the money, cut the funding.
Yeah, how do you cut the funding? That is the, I guess, the $1 million question.
Well, look,
because with USAID, that was simple. In the end, you just had to elect a leader willing to do it. But with Qatar, I mean, it's not up to us.
Well, if you look at, just a small point in the UK, the issue is that if they become an Islamic country, they'll have nuclear weapons.
Nah, so does Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan those nuclear weapons are controlled by Saudi to some degree, but yeah, you're right. I mean, they offset by India, but yeah, on that point, we've got when these people immigrate into the country, and perhaps I should note that after Muhammad immigrated from Mecca to Medina, he then stated that immigration is done. There is no more immigration. There is only jihad and intention. So all Islamic immigration is jihad. It is a form of jihad. And the intention must be to establish Islam and conquer land for the sake of Allah, or your action is not recognized by Allah and He will simply abandon you and you'll go to hell. You won't gain paradise. People need to realize jihad by these single Muslim males is for the sake of jihad. Otherwise, and if they are Muslims, then they believe this. And it means something to them because they will go to hell otherwise. And the problem is we have a secular West that doesn't believe any of this, so they dismiss it. The problem is it means a lot to these people. This culture is steeped in it. And for us to dismiss it because we personally don't believe in it, well, that would be...
It doesn't matter if we believe it. If enough people believe it, they will act as if it's true.
Yeah.
Even if it is not.
Yeah, but unfortunately secular politicians...
If tomorrow 50% of the population believes the sky is pink, and they start acting as if the sky is pink...
Men can have babies, right?
Yeah, you will have to have a policy that has to deal with people who believe the sky is pink, even though we don't believe the sky is pink.
Men can have babies, yeah, men can be women, yeah, but so we're already there.
Yeah.
So look, we have to, first of all, chain migration. Once you have one of these people here, suddenly they bring 6 to 7 family members each. So you get 1 million in, you're going to end up with between 7 and 12 million people, right? They're going to open kebab shops, they're going to open up barber shops and vape shops. Now, there was a raid recently done, I think, in the UK, where they closed these down. The majority of these places are financial fronts for fraud.
Of course.
Right? They're laundering money. And they're also just they're bringing people in. And of course, I mean, why does one kebab shop or why does one barber shop need 300 visas? I'm sure that if I
could solve it with 3.
3 should be plenty.
Yeah.
Right? Why does a kebab shop need 120 visas? Clearly, this is simply a scam. It's clearly a scam to get people across there. I was in Barcelona a couple of times. I was there recently. Barcelona, took taxi. You look at the delivery people in Barcelona, you look at the taxi drivers. These are all Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, all of a stripe. Clearly, my alarm bells were ringing.
Yeah, some may be legit, but a lot of them are not.
To me, the vast majority, when I looked at the delivery guys, I was looking at, that looks like an Al-Qaeda recruit, that looks like a jihadi. My brain was just going, those are jihadis. What I saw was a delivery network. You've got a guy delivering pizza, he can deliver drugs, he can deliver money, he can deliver messages.
And weapons.
And weapons as well, correct. The taxi drivers, they took over the whole taxi industry in Barcelona. These guys have a way to transport people, goods, you name it, all over that city. So I just saw that these guys have come in, they very carefully set themselves up. So they tried to do that in Warsaw, I believe, and the government shut that down. I can see the kinds of people who are driving taxis changed radically within a year. So prevent them from coming in, deny them visas, do solid background checks, but also don't allow them to set up certain industries and take them over. Don't allow them to form certain communities. Monitor their mosques. You have to monitor their mosques.
Yes.
You're going to have to keep an eye on what they do, what they say, who's preaching. Monitor their publications. Monitor their communications. See who they associate with. See where their money's going. See where their money's coming from. I mean, we have to take this seriously. Jihad is a threat. Islam is a threat.
What you're saying is build a muhabarat and a muftiyat. Because I'm serious. I mean, muhabarat is the Arab word for intelligence, general intelligence directorate. And muftiyat is the Hanafi school of thought way, which is Islam can only exist under the authority of the state if it is not in Dar al-Islam. If it's not in the House of Peace, then it has to only be with the explicit permission of the state. You know, in Ukraine or in Romania, where we were never part of Dar al-Islam, we're part of the House of Treaty, but not even during the Ottoman Empire. We're not part of an Islamized society. The Islamic community can only exist under a mufti, and the mufti has to have the personal blessing of the king. So the treaty says these days it's awarded by the intelligence community and the prime minister. And as a result, in 150 years since the treaty has been in force, we never had a jihadi incident. They come and report, Pakistanis or Qataris or whatever, they come and report to the intelligence community. Those guys are not with us. They're newcomers. They're trying to build their own jami, and they're not with us. So same thing in Ukraine. Poland, I don't know for sure if it has it officially, but de facto it works very similarly. That is to say, old Muslims inherited from, well, Ottoman times or times with the clashes with the Ottomans are one category, and everyone else, the new categories, are just regarded with suspicion right from the get-go.
In Poland, house mosques or public mosques that are not sanctioned, there's only one, I believe, in Warsaw, but to turn a community center or a basement into a mosque, that's not permitted. If those are found, they're shut down.
Yeah, same in Romania. Yeah.
This is how it should be. And as you said, yes, there needs to be control over who is running what. There needs to be consequences, because those Muslims have a comfortable life and they're going to report on issues because they don't want their life to be shut down. And I just find it odd that how many Catholic cathedrals are there in Saudi Arabia? How many Baptist?
I think one under construction now.
Now, perhaps.
Yes.
But how many churches are there in Saudi Arabia? Like roughly zero.
Well, approximately zero, maybe 3 or something.
But you look at Germany. There's maybe 1,000 mosques. So,
including Iranian ones.
Why don't
Qatar,
we say, look, if you guys want to have a mosque here, how about we put up a church over there?
Now, to be fair to the Germans and the French in particular, but not to the Brits, Because I'm again, not only I don't care about what happens to Britain, but considering the general attitude of the British population against my people, Romanians, now I'm just having a very hard time giving a damn what happens to British people.
Yeah.
So there's one thing. But then again, if anyone will turn this around in the West, would probably be the Germans and the French among the first. Because about 5 years ago, they came up with this idea, let's go far east in Europe and ask those people what they've been doing, because they've been having Muslim minority for 150, 200 years and somehow no problems. And they came to us and we told them, look, we have this thing called the Muftiyat and that controls the community and we appoint the leaders. And now they're trying to do it the same. The problem is that this would be illegal in Britain. It would be hateful to even suggest it.
The British are cooked. I know what's wrong with them. But recently through the Freedom of Information Act, they finally managed to get some data out of the police, some demographic data on crime breakdown.
Oh, goodness me.
And looking at those figures, one of the crazy things was, when you look at the countries, the top 8 or top 9, I looked at the top 6, but the top 8 or 9 countries where on a per 1,000 basis in number of arrests for crimes, the top 7 or top 8 are all from Muslim majority countries.
And some of them like 99%.
Yeah, it is crazy. So you're looking at 12 arrests per 1,000 for UK citizens. That's what the number. But you look at Somalis, like 120 arrests. And you look at Albanians, 250.
By the way, Albania is no longer a Muslim majority country. Did you know that?
No longer Muslim majority. Interesting. It doesn't have an official religion, but it is generally leans Islamic.
No, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. This is one thing that I've been trying to tell you for several years. There was actually no religion in Albania.
Yeah, they don't.
Muslim is a title, just like Catholic or Orthodox, depending on which family is the more adamant about it. So usually if a Muslim marries an Orthodox, the Muslim converts to the Orthodox. But if a Muslim marries a Catholic, the Catholic converts. Everything is scare quotes, because in reality nobody goes to church or the mosque. They're all empty, like all the time. But more recently, according to the census of 2023, Muslims are like 37% of the population in Albania, followed by Orthodox and Catholics and atheists. Basically, nobody is majority now. It's a plurality, with Islam and Catholic on the downstream, and Orthodox and atheist on the upstream, growing. So, and Albania always was, after communism, of course, was always a bit iffy of being categorized as a Muslim country, because their context has always been very different. And their form of Islam is also different. It's a dervish, very close to Sufi, but not Sufi. It's a very different form compared to Deobandi or Wahhabi or all of these other more organized violence.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean there is no Albanian violence, but it's mostly just standard organized crime, like drug trade and things like that. Rather than religious.
Don't you think now that these numbers are coming out, even in Germany, they recently released some figures. When you start to see African migrants, Pakistani migrants are responsible disproportionately for violence, that when someone comes in from this culture, he's 12 times more likely, 70 times, literally
Oftentimes,
more likely
yeah.
to be a rapist, to be a mass rapist, not just a rapist, a mass rapist, gang rapist, to be a violent criminal.
It doesn't seem to affect elections at all, or even public opinion. Because, you can fake elections, but the public opinion is not affected by much. I mean, Keir Stalin got a higher score with those numbers.
What if it's a public opinion that people feel comfortable? Remember with Trump, people didn't want to say they were voting for him.
Yeah, but they did.
Yeah, they did, but they said otherwise, and then eventually that got to change.
Yeah.
But you do see there's something that's bubbling, and I think that as this knowledge filters through, across a huge population, maybe it takes time.
So you're saying the inertia is longer than we thought?
Possibly, yes. But when I look at news reports, when I look at certain media, especially non-official media, there's an urgency to the message. There's a clarity to the message. They're focusing on issues that seem to really affect people that I think main media has not dealt with yet.
But we've been having that for over a decade, Lloyd. And there was a time when the people like Pamela Geller were far more well-read than now. We've been having this for a long time. What exactly is different now? The issue has gotten worse, I guess, yes, and social media
Issues have gotten worse. People feel encroached upon. People feel threatened. There's an existential fear. there is lines are being drawn. That's the sense that I have. Lines are being drawn. And there's social media like X where one has more access to free speech. I wouldn't say it's 100% free, but you have a lot more access to free speech.
Definitely an improvement over the previous regime.
Definitely. So, and also now you've got, with the Trump White House, you've now got reporting that is a lot more, shall we say, center, if not right.
Mm-hmm.
They've really taken the left media to task. And I just sense a change. I mean, what's going to be the main event that's going to kick things off or change things? Marine Le Pen. I mean, who believes that she was really guilty? Or maybe she is, but then we all know
I
that.
do.
But then...
I do believe she was really guilty.
No, for sure.
The irony thing is that politically it looks terrible with Marine Le Pen. And I understand why everyone believes it's a conspiracy to kick her out.
But then it's probably the same with hundreds of politicians that just get ignored. So everyone knows the reason they're taking her to task is to take her out of the running. Just like with Trump. I mean, eventually they even tried to murder him. Why has there been no results on the investigations into the assassinations? One has to ask. Where are the Epstein files? Right? So there's still elements of the deep state that I think are still very active.
No, let me finish with France, with Le Pen.
Le Pen, yeah.
Because the thing, now she's a mainstream French politician. I'm not even joking. French politicians, especially ex-presidents and ex-prime ministers, do get convicted of corruption. The previous president got convicted. The previous 4 presidents got convicted of corruption.
Yeah.
The previous 5 prime ministers got convicted of corruption. Marine Le Pen is now on the list of mainstream French politicians after she got convicted of corruption. So although I understand why people feel that it is a conspiracy, I know for sure it's not. And she got convicted under a law that she wrote. She campaigned in 2013 on an anti-corruption platform. We need to improve and make these laws tougher. The voters agreed, voted her in. The National Assembly, with the votes from, at the time, Front National, changed the law, and now she got convicted under the law that she upgraded.
Yeah.
So,
But then people are going to think...
politically, it looks terrible, of course.
But people are going to think selective application.
Yes, if I were the French deep state, I would have ignored her just so I won't increase the negative sentiment in society. So,
But the feeling is that people go, we don't really care.
Yeah, of course.
Because
Perception is reality.
she's being persecuted.
Yes.
Because her party is on the right and they want to prevent her from winning the presidency. People are saying the same about Romania, what's happened to this candidate there.
Yeah, the election campaign is in full swing.
Yep. So people are looking at this and going, so I think lines are being drawn, us versus them. And once that solidifies, an enemy's been identified, and you've got a side that you know is a common perception, that you have a team, that we have our tribe, as it were, and that's the other opposition. Yes. I think once that is solidified, then you've got the potential for a conflict, because you've identified your enemy, you've identified your allies, and now you're ready to face off. At the moment, there's grumblings, but not clear battle lines and armies.
And it is your contention that this can only be solved violently? Or primarily violently?
If you can't solve it politically, if you can't talk about the issues, and there was so much censorship to prevent accurate discussion about it and ability to resolve the issues, then I think at the end of the day, remember, look at the Summer of Love, those riots. Everyone said, no, rioting is the voice of the unheard. Well, I mean, what's good for the goose is then good for the gander.
Yeah, of course.
So this will be the voice of the unheard, and let's not judge them. It's mostly peaceful burnings and lootings and
Yeah, the thing is that the majority, at least in Europe, the indigenous population, dare I call it, is not particularly keen on, at least not on mass looting. When we chimp out in Europe, and we do from time to time, it's usually a very localized thing. I mean, the main street may get a little bit looted, but that's pretty much it. It's usually police officers that get hurt, and some of the protesters get hurt. And if the protest turns even more violent, maybe a few politicians get hurt, a government building gets burnt down. That's usually the standard in Europe, even with the worst protests. We don't actually do the kind of thing that Summer of Love tried to normalize. We just don't do that. We kill more people when we do more protests, but violent protests, but just differently.
It was insane. They actually controlled territory and started to form encampments and communities, Chaz and Chop and such. And I mean, those turned shall we say,
They were good jokes, I have to admit.
yeah, but
The
but tho-
memery was off. So.
yeah, but those places became, shall we say, degenerate and violent
Of course.
very, very quickly. So you look at the UK again, but back to as this is my little lab, you know, the way that they're distributing these people across the UK, one has to wonder what else are they doing elsewhere, because they seem to they're concentrating these people in the center of the country in a vertical line, and what impact is this having? And the rest of us are looking on. I think people are looking on, and the fact that the UK is they've arrested in the last year 33,000 people for social media posts. This is what, at least 4 times more than communist China is doing. So now these people are...
To be fair, we don't have to trust CCP's numbers, but it's still a lot. Before the war, before the escalation in 2022, Russia was arresting fewer people for social media posts than Britain.
Yeah.
Now Russia arrests slightly more in a crackdown against people who oppose the war, but still Britain is number 2 after Russia. I mean,
So
it's
one has to wonder,
amazing.
are you the good guys?
Yeah.
You know, you have to ask
Are
yourself.
we sure about that? Yeah.
Exactly. So those are the things that I'm looking at. I mean, Poland is the shining example everyone looks up to, because they monitor these mosques, they control immigration very tightly, they prevent these groups from forming. However, you do see more faces. I know that Poles are not used to seeing a lot of black faces in the country, and you do see more of them. They feel that there's lots of people moving over from Germany, kicked out of Germany, so they come here. I don't know how long they can stay here if they're not being funded, if they don't have the finances. But then if they are here, where is the financing coming from? One has to wonder, because they're not getting welfare. I'm not getting welfare.
You can't actually get welfare.
Exactly.
In Poland.
So where are they being funded? Who's paying for them to be here? Who paid for them to get here? Is the first question. But you know,
Yeah, it's a cheap train from Berlin to here, but staying here is not cheap.
no, I mean when they came from Africa, when they came from wherever,
right.
how'd they get here? Who paid for that? You know, so there's these questions. But once they're here, how do they stay here? What networks do they have? Who's sustaining them? Are they living 12 in a room somewhere in an apartment? Where is this?
I was reading a very interesting article from a Russian dissident publication called Medusa. It's Russian liberals, effectively. Most of them got kicked out of Russia. They got declared foreign agents because they don't agree with Mr. Putin on the war, primarily. And they were writing about Uzbek immigrants here in Poland. And around the middle of the article, there was because you know they're Russian liberals, but again they're still Russian first, so that means they're not afraid to ask the Islam question. And the Uzbeks were like, yeah, the biggest problem was not that we were Muslims. They were okay with that, but the biggest problem was the first time the authorities didn't believe us when we went to report the dubious people who tried to hang around our businesses. And the Russian reporter insisted, what do you mean by dubious people? And the Uzbek guy replies, Pakistanis, Afghanis, and all of that. They heard that we are Muslims and they were trying to get stuck around our businesses. And you know, in Uzbekistan, yes, Islam is somewhat practiced, but it's post-Soviet Islam. So, you know, it's mostly for the community. They're not very ideological, and they usually immigrate for economic reasons. And once they make their money, they do come back. In 2022, and I'll confirm it again this year when I go to Uzbekistan again. In 2022, they had a lot of inland migration, that is to say, people going back to Uzbekistan after they've made their money. You know, of course, a few of them may be here for ideological reasons, but most of them are not. And that was a very interesting kind of dynamic discovered by this Russian publication. But once I tried to discuss it with a liberal journalist friend of mine who lives in Britain, it was like, yeah, we can't talk about that, because if I publish that, I get fired, and I won't be invited to the correct cocktail parties, and I'll be losing all of my connections and all of that. So there is a lot of fear of this topic that is not in the general population.
You know, the facts are racist. That is scary.
How did we get that with facts are racist? Because again, Uzbeks and Afghans are not the different race. They're a different culture, but they're not a different race. I mean, they're neighboring countries.
You know, something that I maybe won't articulate as well as I would like, but there seems to be the idea that you're going to oppress the minority in your country if you report negatively, even truth about them. But a couple of things. White people are a minority in the world, a huge minority. And maybe in your country, this group is a minority, but globally they outnumber you significantly. And maybe you need to start thinking about yourself and your survival, your culture, over that of foreigners, which is a very leftist idea that you prefer the outgroup. But
yeah, that graph is.
yeah. But I look at South Africa and you see where you've got a black majority that has gained political power, gained financial influence, and the support of the international community at one time. And they are now, instead of once they've achieved their goals, there was harmony and cooperation and collaboration moving forward, the country declined significantly. There's simply no comparison with 30 years ago versus now in terms of how the country's declined, how things have failed, and now they're indulging in revenge politics. People need to realize that the third world mind doesn't take responsibility for its failures. It blames someone else. And it's going to blame, well, not themselves. And it's very cheap, but it's very true that they simply blame white people. And you look at
there are no consequences for doing that.
So they've normalized it, just like it's normalized to blame Jews, it's normalized to blame whites, and you owe them. That's why they deserve to get your welfare. There's that. But a couple of things. There's, for the Muslims who are coming to Western countries, they are not getting welfare. This is not for them. They don't see it as you are being good to them. You owe them. Damn it. In fact, why am I not getting more? You're a rich country, pay us. And they also see it as jizya, which is religiously entitled.
Yes.
And then also the idea of, you look at how Muslim ideas have infected Western culture, especially the left, on the left though. On the right too, but you look at the idea of slander. Slander in the West is when you tell a falsehood that damages someone reputationally, financially, and so on. That is to tell a lie that is damaging.
Yeah.
In Islam, slander, ghibba, is completely different. Slander is to tell a truth that person doesn't want known. So
it's still about something damaging, but it can be true as well.
Something that's true. No, it's true. Something that is true that is damaging. So to state a fact that is damaging, then this is frowned upon, potentially even illegal. And there will be consequences for doing so. You'll be shunned. And you mentioned your friend who would report the truth. That is the Sharia that has now become embedded in the law, hate speech laws. That's Sharia. And there are social consequences, there are legal consequences, there are professional consequences. This is where Islamic ideas have burrowed in quietly and then filtered through. Because now you can't insult Islam. But you know what? Oddly enough, you can insult Christianity, the Hindus, all you want. The Jews go wild. But there's only one group that's going to burn down your street.
So, we can do that in Poland, definitely, and most of Eastern Europe. And more recently in France. France is probably the only Western exception, because that whole laïcité thing also applies to Islam. And when the laïcité, which is, secularism, but in the French understanding, when those laws were written in 1907, there was a Muslim minority even then in France, so it was explicit that it applies to you too. But everywhere else in the former Western bloc, yes, it can be dangerous, either socially or legally.
But going back to South Africa, what you're seeing is you've got the black minority who inherited something that they've destroyed. They've benefited themselves. You look at Hamas. How did the top leaders of Hamas all become billionaires? How did their leadership and their family become multimillionaires? Same in South Africa. Look at the black leadership. Billionaires and millionaires. How'd that happen? And then there's revenge politics. Now they are openly talking about, after being given everything, after everyone was liberal,
oftentimes literally everything,
literally given, now they're saying, the politicians are openly saying, we're going to kill white people. We're going to rape your daughters. We're going to kill you. They're saying these things. And no, that's protected speech, because it's really just a cultural and historical throwback to, it's just a reminiscence of the apartheid era, and
Most of those
But
saying
if-
it were not alive when apartheid was a thing.
now-
a lot of them are pretty young.
But now you have politicians saying it. Now you have people saying it on social media. It's becoming a very public thing. But if a white guy had to say something very similar about blacks, he'd be in jail in a heartbeat. And his family might get beaten up. His house might get torched. So you're looking at these double standards, and people need to maybe learn that these experiments have been tried in other places and things have not gone well. And maybe everyone is to realize that not everyone shares the same values. And these values are antithetical. And I think it's a lack of facing up to reality, a lack of basic logic, and a lack of simply respecting just the ugly facts, the ugly truth.
You hit the nail in the head 5 minutes ago. No consequences. That's what really breeds these things. No consequences. If there are no consequences for something for so long, even in civil/Roman law, there's even a codified thing. It's called the law having fallen into desuetude. That is to say, if a law is not enforced for a long enough period of time, it is legally considered abolished, because clearly nobody cares about it, and therefore it's passé. So there have been no consequences for doing these kinds of things for so long.
You're right. Lack of enforcement.
Yeah, therefore it's no longer a problem, right?
I was speaking to a German 2 days ago. He was talking about immigrants coming in. And I was saying, when I worked in security, worked as a bouncer, if you let someone come to the door who was disrespectful and gave the security and the management no respect at the door, you didn't let them in.
Yeah.
Because once they're inside, if you think they were bad at the door,
they could be worse.
They're going to be far worse inside. They're not going to respect you. This is going to lead to violence. There's going to be problems. And you're letting in people, you are rewarding bad behavior. What do you expect once they're in? Simple as that. And I think people are too afraid. I think they're just trying to pacify the dragon, hoping it doesn't eat them first, because they realize if they act now, if they take action now, there's going to be civil unrest.
There will be some turbulence, yes.
And they don't want to deal with that. These are
but
cowards.
it will be worse 100 years from now, or 50 years from now.
Yeah, but they're kicking the can down the road. So they don't want to deal with it now. So they're simply pushing it off. And unfortunately, though, this is not solving the problem. This is simply ultimately ceding your country to invaders. I mean, it's a concern. So Poland has done this right. And I think, I do sense, though, that there's enough of a consciousness and awareness. Even though the politicians, people are not voting for this, but they're getting it anyway. And I think if you aren't going to be able to solve it through discussion or through voting, then at some point, the only way this is going to be solved, unfortunately, is through civil unrest.
And it does seem to be a difference on a per country basis. That is to say, for instance, in Poland now it's currently a left-wing government, but the current prime minister campaigned on being harsher on immigration and chastising the previous right-wing government for not being harsh enough. There was the visa scandal, which also involved a few Muslims and whatever. It was just 100 people, and half of them didn't get accepted anyway, so it wasn't a big issue, but it remained a big campaign issue. And nothing changed on the immigration front in a year of left-wing government. Again, I use scare quotes because this is still Poland. Left-wing has a lot of limits here in a way that it doesn't have in Britain or in France. You couldn't have something like Mélenchon here. That would be considered too haram and would never get even 2%, let alone 20 like in France, right? But by the same token, in Germany, for instance, AfD at least tries to be honest. With all of the problems, I have a lot of problems with AfD myself, but on the immigration issue, they're definitely closer to reality than all of the other political parties that are in the Bundestag. And that doesn't seem to drive the votes towards them high enough to matter. And then you have places like Denmark where the mainstream left turned fully anti-immigration, and now suddenly there's much less tension about immigration in Denmark because of that. So it does seem that no matter how much we try to create one single Europe, there's still the general traits of the peoples of Europe manifest differently depending on their...
I have a question for you. What if there were one of these incidents you see in Germany, one of these things that have happened, these Christmas market style attacks, what if something like that happened in Romania or Hungary or Poland? What do you think that would do to influence public perception and change things. Because recently, I sense a small change in Poland. Before, there were very few black faces. So you were just kind of one of a few and it didn't really matter. Now there's more. And there's more tourism, certainly, but there's also just more odd faces. And I get the feeling that Polish people are slightly more nervous, in a sense, more wary, more distant, less open, because they now see these problems that are happening over there and they think, okay, there's more of these people. And there's
What
just
if they're
this,
coming here? Yeah.
yes, there's just that concern. And I've spoken to Poles who've told me this. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I do come to Poland every 2 or 3 years, so I get a more, not necessarily a more accurate, but a more distant perspective, because I can notice differences. 'Cause, you know, when you live here for 3 years in a row, you don't notice the change as much as someone who only comes every 3 years.
Yeah.
Right. So on one hand, in the touristy areas, there is more, for lack of a better term, diversity. Sure. But outside of the touristy areas, I haven't noticed that there's really more foreigners than in the past, with the exception, of course, of Ukrainians, because a lot of them did show up. I've heard a lot more Ukrainian and Russian on the streets than prior to 2022. But that was to be expected. But I haven't heard, for instance, I don't know, Southeast Asian languages or
I'm just referring generally to black people. No one looks at the Vietnamese and thinks they're going to be a problem. No one looks at Koreans. They look at black people.
Vietnamese have great pho. I took my associates to Vietnamese food because they've never tried it before. The pho is great.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure. But even the Vietnamese, I mean, the Vietnamese guy there approached me in Polish. So no, that was quite surprising and something that you don't see in West Europe.
There's a huge Vietnamese population here. They
Yeah,
came across.
I know. Yeah, but they do try their best, because the standard in Europe really is not racial. It's like learn our language and try to behave as close as possible to us, and you'll be fine. Yeah. If you don't, then we'll have a problem. But I haven't heard I don't know, click languages or Southeast Asian languages like, I don't know, Khmer or things like that.
No.
Maybe they are, and I haven't traveled enough, because we've only been in Poland for like a week now, and we'll still be for a few more days for the Three Seas Initiative Summit, and then we'll drive back home. So I haven't noticed that of a significant change, but there is, yes, more wariness in the rural areas in a way that it wasn't a decade ago. Yeah. A decade ago, when I would stop at random to ask something in a village, there was always immediate openness, whereas now they first check to see, oh, the car is from Romania, okay. Then the openness started. It was not by default. So I guess I noticed that, but other than that, I don't know.
Okay, because sometimes someone has to go first. Let's say there were an incident here. The Polish government cracks down extremely hard. That gives license to other countries to do the same.
Right.
The precedent's been set. And also you've got, I'm sure that the Trump administration they seem to me to be understanding some issues. And I'm sure they're doing things in the background to handle these things. But the issue of Qatar, I mean, are they they looked at how effective the cutting of the USAID funding was? What if they start cutting Qatari funding? What if they start doing that? Perhaps you might see some changes if they start sanctioning Qatar.
Yeah, that would probably help a little bit. We will be meeting the Trump administration tomorrow, actually. Because they will be showing up as associated partners to the Three Seas Initiative, and the summit takes place tomorrow.
And then,
we'll make sure to ask some of these questions.
And the Muslim Brotherhood, are they going to take action? Because again, everyone goes to the Muslim Brotherhood in the US. You look at CARE, for instance. CARE cannot be sanctioned or disbanded or whatever, ejected out of the country because they haven't committed any crimes. Which, in one sense, makes sense. They haven't done anything wrong. However, they are formally a part of Hamas. Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood is a proscribed organization. So is Hamas. CARE is associated with them. CARE is part and parcel of they're part of the umbrella organization. They are fulfilling their own initiatives that are part of these guys establishing their caliphate, pushing forward the Islamic Muslim Brotherhood goals. In that sense, then, if you're an associate, an affiliate, you then should be sanctioned. So I don't know why they haven't taken action against the Muslim
Foreign Agent
Brotherhood.
Registration Act in the US applies to American citizens as well. And if you're associated with a designated terrorist organization, you still end up in trouble, or at least you should. A friend of mine, a Republican operative, got in a bit of a trouble with the DOJ because she had worked with a right-wing politician from Georgia. That would be the Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus, right? And then she worked for Ron DeSantis, and got into trouble because she hadn't properly filed the Foreign Agent Registration Act paperwork. So if it could apply to a low-level right-wing operative, a blonde woman, why shouldn't it apply to the Council of American Islamic Relations?
Didn't apply to Hunter Biden.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know why they don't though. Why has the Muslim Brotherhood been given a free pass in the US? Why has CARE got a free pass in the US? And CARE was involved. I mean, you're looking at the largest terror funding trial in the US. I mean, I believe it was someone who was involved with CARE, but also he's involved with Hamas. So why has there not been consequences? What influence, especially under George Bush, there were massive inroads into the US government by Hamas, by the Muslim Brotherhood, under George Bush. I mean, it was crazy. And has that been cleaned up? Is it still a problem? Those are... I mean, I'd like to see this funding cut. I'd like to see Qatar sanctioned. I'd like to see...
To be fair, it has been tried before. During the first Trump administration, there was a boycott of Qatar. And it worked and it didn't work. They had mixed results, mixed outcomes.
How well was it enforced?
Reasonably well, to the extent that you can expect in the region. It was reasonably well, but the results were mixed. And... then it got scrapped, and then Biden got in, and of course everything went back to normal. Now, of course, the Trump administration may try it again, but until we have a relatively official acknowledgement, not just in public, but at the elite level, that look, part of the enemy is that. We've seen a little bit from that with Taiwan, because everyone was asking, why is Trump trying to raise tariffs from Taiwan? I mean, it's a strategic ally since forever. We've been maintaining this strategic ambiguity just so we can keep the CCP in check. And then the Trump's delegate shows up there and says, guys, all you have to do is just buy gas from us and not from Qatar.
I was about to suggest
Did the US really need the revenue from Taiwan for LNG? No, of course not. I mean, that would be crazy.
No, but you deny it to your enemy.
Yes, denying it to Qatar was the point.
So I was about to say that. At what point is the US going to insist that buy from us rather than our enemies? It's like with Germany paying Russia for energy. Like, why are you feeding the dragon?
Yes.
It makes no sense. So those are things...
The whole of the European Union spends more money on Russian energy than it spends on the war effort on behalf of Ukraine.
Wow.
This is stats from 2024, not from 2015 or something.
They should be buying from the US now that the US has started to drill again. I mean, again, you have to wonder, you look at some of the actions of some of these governments, you think, are they complicit? Are they ignorant or are they complicit?
Some are complicit, some are downright stupid. It's probably a mixture of both, because it's usually a mixture of both. There's some traitors, but a lot of stupid as well.
And then also, you spoke of French. You know, I've got a document on Americans who converted to Islam in the 1800s. And there's actually, strangely, a number of people that you wouldn't realize. And they didn't change their names. The same in France. A number of these, even in Germany after the war, lots of these Nazis converted to Islam. Didn't change their names. You have to wonder then, what Islamic fifth column is part and parcel of the elites of these countries, especially philosophies, armies, and so on, government, who is actually called John Smith, but his great-great-grandfather converted to Islam, and now they're actually potentially a fifth column in the country. You know, going way back. These are questions.
Fair.
A lot of the people involved in mysticism, people who are spiritual, involved in Sufism.
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself as well, I mean, are we really looking in the right places? Are we shining a light in the right places to find these influences?
Yeah, my biggest problem with this kind of line of reasoning is that it can also fuel not unjustified
purges.
Yeah, purges and the kind of paranoia that we've seen before. And the reason I'm iffy about it is because, well, immediately when communism fell, my country went through something like that. Let's look for hidden commies, hidden former regime people. Now, to be fair, a lot of them did deserve it. But it also ended with quite a few innocent victims.
Sure.
And,
but then how many actual known commies in Poland ever got convicted of crimes?
Mostly none.
Seriously.
There was the Lustratia effort that purged a few of them from positions and whatnot, but nothing really too serious.
Yeah. So you have people that disappeared other people, and they still today they're alive and well and happy.
Definitely, the judicial system, the corporation of the judges is still
So
mostly
South Africa. I mean, how many people really saw justice?
very few.
Same thing. So yeah, I mean, so those are things. But what do we do as you said, the extreme radical online few who actually discuss this, or the extreme radical online right, or what is our title today?
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. I mean, sometimes we're called extremists, sometimes we're called weirdos, crazy, scum of the society.
Yeah, but now
there's
we're
plenty of
seeing
names.
our views are becoming mainstream.
Yes.
We were on the fringes 5 years ago. Now
And
these
definitely
views,
10. Definitely 10 years ago.
I remember when I was speaking about the topics I cover 7 years ago, I was labeled a nutcase. I was on the fringe. Now people talk about this stuff. They use the words, they use the phrases. It's becoming, people are getting educated. I see the pushback on social media, and maybe the people as us will hold the media to account. I think the media is being held to account. Politicians, at least.
Now that you mention this, let me ask you this. There is an internal debate among all of our marginal circles, everyone, the very online right, whatever you want to call us, on whether, on one hand, we all agree that the mainstream, the legacy media, sucks. But the question is, are podcasts, including this one, to be honest, are podcasts necessarily a solution? And up until very recently, the consensus was like, maybe no, but they're definitely worth a shot. And now there is the entire scandal. I'm sure you've you've read about it a little bit, namely Douglas Murray versus Joe Rogan and that comedian guy.
Comic Dave Smith.
The anti-Semitic guy, right? Now we have to have the same discussion that we've been having against the New York Times. Now we have to have it against each other, effectively.
That is true. Well, look, I'd rather have a war of words and a battle of ideas
Fair.
than
The one with swords and guns.
correct. I think that is better. Either way, there will be damage. Either way, there's casualties, but better than swords and guns. And the truth, I believe, ultimately wins. The facts eventually surface. I think when people are starving for truth, and I think that, look, comic Dave Smith, I've listened to some of his takes on Islam, and the guy is ignorant. I like Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray, I believe, was ambushed in that interview, and I think he did well. Now, everyone criticizes him for whatever his demeanor was, but Dave Smith he doesn't really know what he's talking about. You've got emotional appeals rather than actual understanding of the doctrine, and there's a failure to separate people from doctrine. The doctrine in Islam is blatantly violent.
Yes, but on the other hand, it's emotions that win elections. It's emotions that win hearts and minds. Because, after all, Marine Le Pen is not the most knowledgeable person on Islam compared to the guy that owns the Reconquête party. But Marine Le Pen gets a much higher audience because, she reads the philosophy and says, okay, that's a bit too complicated. Vote for me or else you'll be thrown off of the buildings by those barbarians. And that wins elections rather than a very nuanced discussion on doctrine and whatnot. I'm not saying that is useless, but I am saying that
it mobilizes the masses.
Yeah, it's a conflict not of visions, but rather of tactics.
Look, you've got something that Jordan Peterson discusses sometimes, and something that you've got psychopaths who have their own agendas. They're drawn to power.
Of course.
Now the right's in ascendant, they're going to move towards power. They're going to go where they're safe, because what's interesting when you hear people say, but we're not safe, I don't feel safe. Safety. Safety is a huge thing for psychopaths because they realize if they're exposed, they're in danger, they're a minority, and they're depraved, and they will be judged, and they could suffer consequences. So safety. So when you hear these words, safety, I just hear like these are psychopaths trying to.
It's definitely a power play. Yeah.
Trying to hide. Sure. So they want to be safe. They want to be free from consequences. Right? Freedom from consequences again. So, and you've got these people who are serving their own self-interest, moving into the right. You've got people abusing all sorts of ignorance for their benefit. And the only way is to put your ideas out there. You've got a voice, you've got social media, and eventually I think at some point, maybe you'll go through a cycle of bad ideas, but they'll fail. And eventually the good ideas will come around. So you just have to battle it out. You have to learn to use logic, grammar, the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Some people are very good at logic, maybe not very good at rhetoric. So we just have to get better.
Yeah, there is also this tradition that the elite, the government, whether it's king or council of crown or democracy, doesn't really matter. Eventually, the authority just tries every single wrong idea until it runs out of options and it has to try the correct idea. I also get it why a lot of people who become aware of these things, they also become immediately blackpilled or disillusioned or whatnot, because they're like, okay, so under these circumstances, it may take decades. Life is short, mate. We don't have time for that.
Also, some of these podcasters that have risen through the ranks, they become very influential. There were questions about the funding. Funded by China. Because China has its own interests. So many of them have...
Or Russia. Yeah.
Funded by Russia, funded by Iran.
Yes.
How many are being funded by Qatar? Indirectly. For instance, when I looked at the funding you look at the lobbying happening in universities, the money when you go through, I think the years that I looked at was 2012 to 2019. Saudi, the other countries, and Qatar together were like $6.5 billion or something. Or, something in the billions. Then you looked at the funding that Iran gave to the universities during the same period, and if I recall, it was something like $75. And there's no way it's $75.
Maybe 75 million, I could believe it,
but they were clearly funding it in a way that bypasses mandatory reporting
laws. Yeah.
So clearly the money's, if I give the money to you, you give it to your buddy, and your buddy donates it, well, no need to report it, because it wasn't the country that gave it, it was the guy. And he made 10 donations under the mandatory reporting limit. So they find ways to do it. They'll find fronts to do it. So how many of these, how do I know that Candace Owens isn't taking money from Qatar in some way, indirectly? I mean, for argument's sake.
I will not answer that question in public, but I know the answer. I do. So, the thing is that on one hand, of course, it's absolutely correct what you said, but on the other hand, doing these kinds of things costs money. We at Freedom Alternative try to be, the model is called semi-transparent. That is to say, everyone who is a donor gets on a special website that is specifically for funders. I try to be as transparent as possible with where the money is going, how, why, and then in a lot of cases, the donors get to decide, they make decisions on some of the things, right? But most podcasters don't have the time or the willingness to do that. So as a result, they will try to, go on a shortcut. And the shortcut usually is some very friendly company that wants you to sell their useless product, but they're also paying you $100,000 per video. And a lot of these people don't question, what the hell is that product? How valuable is that product? Like it happened to Tim Pool, right? He ended up being funded and spreading Russian propaganda without even knowing it.
Yeah.
And sure, we can blame him for, with his experience in investigative journalism, he should have known it, but he didn't, because it's a lot of money. But what can we expect to people even less experienced than that?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it's like, hey, very easy to make money on my great social media presence.
Yeah, but then also, there are certain voices that reach to prominence, and they should be targeted. If you're a good propagandist, you're going to want to target those voices. I don't get targeted. I mean, look, I'll tell you later what I think I've told you what I earn on YouTube, but it's not enough to pay my rent. I'll say that.
Clearly.
I'm not going to buy a car with that anytime soon, right? So
maybe if we go to Belarus, we'll maybe find some Lada, some Zhiguli from the 70s.
Maybe. So, but also then, I think to a large degree, I know the subject extremely well, so maybe I'm less of a good target. Right? Maybe I'm less of a good target. Maybe my voice is not big enough. Who knows? But I think they must be. The Chinese are definitely targeting influencers on TikTok, influencers on YouTube, and they're pushing this propaganda.
I should know. I was targeted by China. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, even YouTube itself is infiltrated. Have you seen the issues have you seen YouTubers putting out videos stating that suddenly 1 month to the next, 1 day to the next, their views have dropped to a quarter? Any China content gets amplified in the YouTube algorithm.
Yes.
Any anti-China content
Gets deranked.
gets deranked. So clearly there's infiltration. Google, YouTube.
To be fair, the YouTube's algorithm is extremely easy to manipulate from the outside. You don't even have to have someone inside. All you need is 1 million phones and 1 million internet connections and 1 million YouTube accounts.
I have one phone right here. I just need 999,000.
Yeah, no, but I'm not joking. I mean, there are entire farms all over Southeast Asia, not just in China, almost all of them owned by the CCP, but not all of them located in China, where you have like 10 people, each of them manipulating 500 phones or more.
Yeah.
And, you know, all sorts of these remote farms, and they just like and dislike whatever is the order, effectively. And if you repeat that process over a week, eventually it manipulates the algorithm into believing that this is more popular and this is more controversial, and therefore it gets deranked or amplified. It's really that simple. It doesn't even, it does require conspiracy or coordinated action, but not necessarily infiltration.
Interesting.
Yeah, this has happened in the past with various subtopics, usually related to China, because apparently only China is available to pull this at scale.
Well, look, you know, we don't have that kind of reach. However, something that we can do, if you can influence 2 or 3 out of every 10 in your circle,
yes,
that becomes mainstream knowledge.
Yes.
Effectively, just 10% of a group has to believe something for it to become mainstream. So if you can influence within your circle, the reach that you have, 1 or 2 people, then that means that you are now creating a mainstream view. So while we may not have the billions of dollars for reach, we can use high concept actions. So if we can just be influential and reach out to where we can, then I think we can still make a difference. I mean, the Berlin Wall fell, Russia fell.
Yeah.
Eventually, even these other lies and things will fall.
Now, I was a kid when the Berlin Wall fell, but for the most part, even from the few things that I can remember, it eventually did reach enough people via the objective of I have to influence 1 person or 2. And one by one, starting in the case of Romania, starting from the western border, where it was getting closer, because Yugoslavia was neutral, which although didn't matter that much because it was still a communist country, it did allow inflow of capital and information from the other bloc, from the western bloc, which eventually seeped over the border and slowly targeted more hardline countries, especially Romania and the Soviet Union, because we didn't have any border with a Western country.
Yeah.
So there's that. So it can work, but it just takes longer.
Yeah.
But in the 70s and 80s, including my generation, we were born as patient people. We're like, okay, big things require a lot of work and a lot of time. The kids today are very anxious.
But now social media has influenced that. Things can go viral quickly. Another thing, how does Qatar manage to push its propaganda and get people to, how does it weaponize sympathy? Well, if you are against the in-group and for the out-group, then clearly
that is exploitable.
that is exactly exploitable. But if you're a patriot, if you believe in patriotism, patriotism means believing in your country. Patriotism is a bad word in a lot of Western countries.
Yes.
Patriotism,
It shouldn't be, but it is.
if that comes back, people are going to know who they are and what they stand for, what their history is, and what violates those things. And they'll say no to those things. Again, also, oddly enough, you're seeing a lot of different countries, you see a rise in Christianity. Now, it might be cultural Christianity, let's say it like that, but people are starting to reconnect with their roots because they see them and there's who are we. But if you don't know who you are, if you don't know, you're just a leaf blowing in the wind. But once you identify your culture, your values, what you stand for.
It creates a rooted sentiment, yeah.
Correct. And I think I see this is one of the things that I believe I'm seeing. People are trying to find who are we. And also if it's okay to point fingers at a group like the Jews, for argument's sake, we're going to now annihilate them, which seems to be the case, right? Never again is happening today as we speak. Then people are realizing, hold on, but it's okay to identify enemies. So let's identify who we are, and it's okay to point fingers at other enemies. So I think every plan that people make will eventually backfire or have unintended consequences. There will be unintended consequences. So
it's why I'm not a big fan of this framework, although I know that is not necessarily inevitable, because nothing is inevitable in politics, of course. Everything is avoidable until it happens. It always leads to unintended consequences. And this is something that probably the current crop of anti-Semites don't realize because, it's going to be 100 years since the end of World War II in just 20 short years.
Yeah.
And that takes us to the 100-year limit. Every major historical event becomes ancient history around 100 years.
I watched that video. It was brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah.
So on one hand, the anti-Semites are like, yes, that's great because after 100 years we get a shot of our revisionism. Yes, that's true, but everyone else gets a shot at their revisionism as well.
Yeah.
So what if we start remembering about the collaboration of the Mufti of Jerusalem with a certain Austrian painter? What if we, right? So, there's always unintended consequences.
Put that on Facebook and see how fast they shut you down.
Yes.
It is crazy. It's the facts.
Yes.
So, yeah, granted. I mean, look, the attacks on Churchill. I mean, this is insane.
Yeah, it's an attempt at revisionism, but again, the closer we get to the 100-year anniversary, what if we get our shot at revisionism as well? Yes, history gets revised all the time, but what they do, what they get it wrong is that it never gets revised all the time just in one direction. It's in all directions.
Right.
So every faction will have to be offended a little bit. Every faction will have to swallow some of its pride. And at some point, it was politically incorrect to mention that Napoleon was a tiny guy and had a small dick.
Right.
But then eventually, the facts were the facts, and after about 100 years, it became, it happened, mate. It is what it is.
Yeah. But also, you've got this idea of we have to be tolerant, we have to accept. At some point, when does that turn around? Exactly.
Yeah.
When does that turn around? And suddenly, people go, you know what? I don't.
How about no?
Yeah. And exactly, what happens then when you hit that brick wall and suddenly people go, enough? And that can well happen because humans are not infinitely pliable.
Yeah.
They're
more malleable than the genetic determinists think, but they're not infinitely malleable the way social constructivists think.
And because I think you've got an attempt to change things which is disruptive, and people are seeing now how destructive and disruptive it is. It's not working. I think there's the view that we need to try something else, and I think they're coming to the end of that road, and people are starting to see there's an existential issue here. Our existence is threatened. And it's at what point do they go, I'm a rat, I'm stuck in a corner, and they come out fighting because they've got nothing to lose. This is one of the concerns I have. And I mean, the idea of you will own nothing and you'll be happy, I think that's failing.
Oh, of course.
So
much so that the author of the idea is now himself being investigated and is going through his own personal great reset. I mean, so that's so much fun.
I hope so. No, there's never consequences, but that's it. I mean, losing prestige, those things for them are an issue already. But yeah.
That's one of the great things that I really like about the modern neo-right. I have a lot of problems with newer right-wingers, but this is one of the things that I really like, is that they share my idea that I've been having for over 25 years, which is, I just don't give a damn about your prestige.
Yeah.
Oh no, whatever intellectual is going to write something nasty about me, who the hell cares? Oh, they won't call me to their great cocktails, who the hell cares? And as it turns out, you only have to say once or twice, you have to say no. They'll get upset a little bit, and then eventually they'll get over it. I mean, again, this channel still gets invited to geopolitical summits, still gets approved to... Yeah, we had a little bit of problem in 2020 when we called them all retarded incompetents because of the way they handled the pandemic. And about a year or so, we're kind of blacklisted on certain events. But then eventually they're like, well, you know what? Actually, those guys are just being honest. So even the people who despise us are now like, even when you think we're wrong, we know you're wrong honestly, right? Which I think is the best you can achieve.
Actually,
it's the best you can achieve. It's the kind of relationship that I have with a certain left-wing podcaster in Romania, where when I know that when he's wrong, where I think he's wrong, I know he's wrong honestly. That is his sincere opinion. There's no one from Iran or from Qatar or from the Social Democrats or whatever paying him to say something that is against our interests or whatever. If we could get to a certain situation where we have more people like that, including people who are wrong, but honestly,
right,
that would improve things. Because now we have a lot of people who are wrong dishonestly.
Yeah, agreed. You know, Osama bin Laden said that people back the strong horse when they see strength. We've seen a lot of strength from Islam.
He was right about that.
That's correct. But now, if you can see strength out of Trump, this might inspire people because that's inspirational to people.
Trump's political story is inspiration in itself. Everything was thrown at him, literally everything, including bullets.
Yeah, and
he still got reelected against all odds, well, almost.
And so it's so hard to predict, but I think that you just sense that the tide was only supposed to be flowing in one direction, but you sense there's a return on the tide.
But suddenly, fun fact, no.
Say again?
Suddenly, fun fact, no, it doesn't flow in one direction.
Yes.
Yeah, I made a video about 10 years ago, the myth of political inevitability. And I was saying then that, look, nothing is inevitable in politics until it actually happens. Everything can still be changed, no matter how everything, all odds seem against you. No, it is still possible. If it hasn't happened yet, then it is still avoidable.
Yeah.
Right? Because in 2021, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. You'll all be wearing masks and need 5 QR codes to buy bread. And I'm like, did that happen? No. Okay, no. If it hasn't happened, then it won't happen as long as some of us are still alive.
Yeah.
And again, 4 years later, those with those ideas are in jail.
And if you see Le Pen come back from defeat, that is going to inspire people. That's a rocky scene, where he's beaten, but he gets back up and he wins. That's going to leave people feeling inspired, because if you're going to shoot the king, you better kill him.
Yeah, better not miss.
Better not miss, exactly.
Yeah.
The fact that if they go after Bolsonaro and others, you look at these people succeeding.
Nayib Bukele.
No, I was about to say
Javier Milei.
You're reading my mind.
Javier Milei, same story. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm trying to get.
So I think we're seeing inspirational examples. They've tried to remove all the inspirational examples, but now the fact that you see people snatching victory from the jaws of defeat and succeeding, I think this is already starting to create that sense of we can do this. There is another way. It's seeding that in people's minds. People are desperate for that. So you're looking at, you don't have to be a majority to win. You don't have to be.
Yeah, of course.
So
you need 10-15% of really tough motherfuckers who refuse to agree with the regime. That's it.
Yeah. So I think I think those examples are there. And if Marine Le Pen comes back, the way Trump came back, he inspired people. Marine Le Pen, she comes back, she'll inspire people. So whatever you do now, if you come back from being suppressed in the UK or being suppressed, in whatever country, in Germany and so on, if anyone comes back from that, the AfD has a victory, or whatever, I think you're going to see people really inspired, and that's going to filter through. And that tipping point, maybe that sometimes the tipping point is very sudden. Sometimes it's
Lenin used to say that sometimes nothing happens for centuries, and then centuries happen in weeks.
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point. So
I believe it was with decades, but anyway. Same idea. Yeah.
But the idea is there. Yeah, I think so.
Same thing with the very idea of that, most of Europe is a democratur rather than a democracy. And, we're fighting against Russia. Great, we all agree. But what are we fighting for? Right?
That's a fair question.
And when J.D. Vance showed up and just asked straight up this question, he just broke the dam, because we were all thinking that. But then, at first, the first month after that speech in Munich, it was, how dare this Yahoo, this redneck, come and say this? But then 2 months later, the same elite opinion is like, the guy kind of has a point, and we kind of do have to think about some reforms here and there, and we can't just go on. We can't go on like that. So sometimes the tipping point can come out of the blue. The tipping point could have come a month prior when Javier Milei thrashed the WEF. It could have come with the first election of Trump, but it just didn't, and eventually just came with a random speech by the vice president at an obscure security conference. I mean, the Munich Security Conference, I follow it because I love geopolitics, but most people don't care. But then suddenly that one became the tipping point, or one of the tipping points.
People are terrified he'll be the next US president.
Yes.
So,
and there are some legitimate reasons to be afraid of that, because he's a legit isolationist as opposed to Trump. Trump wants to make a good deal. J.D. Vance is a legit isolationist. But that's a story for 5 years from now, isn't it?
Look, he may have personal views, but that's not necessarily him able to enforce them.
Yes.
Because there's the way things are as well.
Yes, that is true. That is true. But still, even as a vice president, when the vice president of the US comes and tells you, look, we love you as allies, but you really have to do more. And by the way, you're slipping away from the common values thingy. That hurts. And at this point, a lot of countries of Europe do deserve the whipping. They deserve it.
No, agreed.
Especially the governments.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see look, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, that's a serious threat. That's a very serious threat. But if Iran gets whipped and regains democracy, I think that would inspire people again. And people go, you know what, we can do this. So, yeah.
I haven't met a single Iranian citizen abroad that doesn't agree with bombing Iran.
That's odd. I know.
It's quite
same.
amazing how much support there is from that, from people who have something personal to lose, right? A lot of them have relatives still stuck there, and they're like, an unfortunate consequence, but that regime has to fall. And again, this is from Persian people who live abroad. And so...
Yeah, people are missing strength. People want to see strength. And I
think I
this
told you the story. In 2019, I went to film the Salafi mosque, the Iranian mosque in Hamburg. And we took a cab from somewhere else in Hamburg and take us to this mosque. The woman, who was a taxi driver, was a woman, looks at us. It was me and an American friend of mine, also long-haired. The American friend of mine speaks impeccable German. I'm kind of suck at German, but still not bad. You know, she looks at us and like, you guys don't look German. And I'm like, well, we're not. I'm Romanian, he's American. Oh, American, interesting. Did you vote for Trump? Again, this was in 2019. And he was like, yes, of course. And I'll vote again in 2020 for him. Good, please vote harder or maybe he bombs Iran. And by the way, why the hell are you going to this mosque? And the rest of the conversation was about just how terrible the lady was Iranian.
Right.
She was driving a cab in Hamburg. And the reason I'm telling this story is, one, that there is more support for strength than we dare to imagine. And two, it's to also emphasize why I'm skeptical of looking at things just specifically on, well, we see too many foreigners on the streets. A lot of those foreigners might actually agree with us, right? And having a mechanism to filter these things is highly important, not just for them, but for us as well. That's why I'm skeptical of some portions of the terminally online right, which views everything exclusively from an ethno-racial
What do you
perspective.
think of the rise of anti-Semitism on the right? What do you think? Are these fake rightists or these...
Some are fake, but some of it is there. There has always been a smaller measure of anti-Semitism on the right than on the left, but it has always been there. Is it now, at least in part, artificially amplified? Yes. But some of it is genuine. Some of it, because it was always there. Going back not just to the 1930s, like the 1830s. It was always there to certain levels. Sometimes more amplified, sometimes more flattened, but it was always there. In about 20 years, that will matter a little bit less. Because at some point, again, I made this video 7 or 8 years ago when I said the Jewish lobby is kind of mental and useless. Because, a lot of it is amplified by the stupidity of certain members of the Jewish lobby. Like, for instance, it happened in 2018 when a Norwegian guy almost got jailed for having the happy merchant on his credit card. His grandfather was Jewish, so he was making a joke at his expense in a way.
Right.
Yeah, but he got sentenced on hate speech and whatever, because that is also considered an anti-Semitic meme. And but he was like, yeah, but this is where my shekels are. So it's like a funny thing. A lot of these exaggerations are now creating a counter reaction of equal and opposite strength, as they say in physics. And eventually, if those people are targeted by artificially amplified anti-Semitic propaganda, some of them will end up believing it. There's not much you can do about it, other than to just keep on speaking the truth. And the truth will have to still be in the format more closer to what I'm saying, which is, look, Israel isn't heaven, they're not saints, but they are the civilization against barbarism. And
Correct.
for reasons of practicality, I tend to like civilization, right? Because when you put it in these terms, it's very difficult to get attacked emotionally or personally. But if you put it in the religious terms or emotional terms, well, of course, you're going to be much easier to attack emotionally. That's why Qatar invests so much in things like Now This or Al Jazeera, which always does very emotional reporting on this issue. Because that works. That wins elections. Or at least influential.
We need to learn from our enemies as well.
Yes, and we refuse, oftentimes we do refuse. We have too many people on the right who are afraid to wield power or are afraid to use tools that have 100 or 150 years of track record of working And they're like, yes, but the leftists have been using them for 30 years. So what? That doesn't mean the tool itself is left-wing. Are hammers inherently a tool of crime? No, we can build houses or we can kill people with them.
So what do you think we can do to undermine what Qatar is doing?
Well, other than sanctions, we should probably use more. We used to have a lot of emotional propaganda that was countering Islam 10, 12 years ago. A lot of that is gone now. Either because the people creating it got tired, or because a lot of people creating it got shadow banned. You know, Pamela Geller used to make incredible emotion-based anti-Islamic propaganda.
I follow her on X, but she doesn't have the voice she used to.
Yeah, because she probably got tired of it. She lost a lot, didn't gain much out of her emotionally driven.
And she nearly got killed.
And she nearly got killed twice.
So that would kind of put a damper on things.
Yes.
Yeah, you see it happening with people. There's a chilling effect.
Yeah, it does.
And there's that. But you also see more voices springing up, more people willing to speak. So there's more people, more noise, and one voice might disappear, but another one rises. So you do see that. You know, oddly enough, I don't know how effective my voice is. I don't know if it's... I used to grow by 1,000 to 1,400 subs a month. And then suddenly one day, bang, my channel got to a maximum for about a year, 140 subs a month, maximum. That was it. And then in January, I grew by 1,400 subs. And bang, now I'm down to 140 subs a month, give or take. Now, but it's crazy how I used to grow by over 1,000 subs a month. And I sense that I'm being heavily throttled.
Yeah, we all are.
You know, and I mean, I somehow slipped through the cracks in Jan. Got 1,400 subs.
Yeah, the mainstream assumption these days, of course we don't have evidence for it, but the mainstream assumption is that the current CEO of Google was more than happy with Trump being elected and ordered some reforms, and they were done just in time to fit the trimestral report. So the CEO sees that something was done in accordance.
And now they've gone back to...
Yeah, and then got reverted back to. That's one assumption. I'm not particularly sure that is true, but it does fit.
I can buy that.
It does fit.
On X, I look at Grok, for instance. There are issues with that. Look, all these AIs have problems, but Grok has problems. It's supposed to be the most truthful. It's not.
Not on Islam.
Definitely. But you'll notice it has a strong apologist slant. Very strong one. Now, I'm an expert on the topic, so when I speak with it, I can see when it's trying to mislead me. I can see where and how it's trying to bamboozle. And you see it, and it's like, sure, maybe they've opened up some things, but there are areas where things that can get away with it, it will lie to you. Not make a mistake, because it's a feature, it's not a bug.
Sometimes it's a feature, but I'm less techno-optimistic. I just don't trust that kind of thing a priori. I presume it's wrong all the time, because I know the data that is used.
Yeah, there are things that it'll talk about happily because it's non-controversial, doesn't cause offense. Or
the thing is that the fault is not on the model itself, it's what the data is
the
used
data
to,
and how it's programmed.
Yeah, what is
the
used
bias of the programmers.
Yeah, what is used to train it.
But what you said about Google, I can apply that same idea. I can see parallels in Grok. It's you know, on the surface it looks good, but yeah, because I think it's designed to create a certain happy feeling. Which is
of course, ultimately it is a product that needs to be sold, has a good smiley face. And if it doesn't make people happy, then it will sell less. Now, of course, Grok is now not for profit yet, but I expect at some point it will be, or some derivative of it.
Well, XAI just bought X. So that's clearly where the money's going, where the focus is on that side of things.
Although a lot of that is just changing hands in the money for tax purposes, because Elon is moving everything from Delaware to Texas.
Yeah.
So it has to change ownership of some.
And there was the risk he could lose X as well. So now he's moved it to where he's safe from. Yeah, because there were some issues about people buying up the shares
maybe next time you show up to Romania. Because I've been coming, what is the third or fourth time?
I'm happy to go to Romania. I'm happy to.
Maybe next time you show up on my sofa, and I'll make sure to clear the whole day so we can tape even longer.
Sweet.
And by that time, maybe we'll be thinking of this a little clip and we'll say, well, at least we got that one right. And look, now we have someone that is openly mocking Islam in the primetime slot at MSNBC. Who knows? That would be something that I would do if I were director of MSNBC, because hey, we had Rachel Maddow at the prime time, so I had the most loony extremist, and that lost audience. How about if we go just straight up in the other direction and just do something, the most controversial thing that all of our circles could think of? What could possibly go wrong? We get ignored even more. I mean, if you're MSNBC at this point, there's no way to go but up, right? That's something that I would do. And we'll see what happens. CNN managed to turn the ship around somehow, eventually, by kicking out the loonies. Kind of like with Nayib Bukele, right? El Salvador is unfixable, there's too much crime. And then, some half Philistine, half Arab, Palestinian, right? Guy comes up, what if we jail all the criminals? Oh, but you don't understand, that's too complicated. No, let's build a big, beautiful gulag and put all of the criminals there. Let's see what happens. Right? So sometimes the solution is really that simple. Sometimes
it's political will.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know what needs to be done. It's just, let's do it.
Yeah, we allow ourselves to be bamboozled by all sorts of these highly complicated...
No, at some point, though, people are going to ignore, look at the judiciary, the lawfare happening in the US. At some point, everyone's going to go...
It delegitimizes the judiciary itself rather than...
Everyone's going to go, you know what, you guys... tell you what, make pass everything you want, try and enforce it. We'll be deporting people today. Thanks.
Yeah, right. That's how the Texas has this slogan, right? Come and take it. Right? We're not allowed to do that? Okay, fine. Come and take it. All right, Lloyd. Thanks a lot for your time. Thank you all for having the boredom to actually watch these shows. I'm sure there's something defective about myself and yourself for watching this. And I'll see you all soon with more chat about the 3Cs initiative from here in Poland. Cheers.
Cheers.